everyone, it's Nikki. I'm so glad to have you on the channel. Make sure if you haven't done it yet, you hit the like and subscribe. Today, we are going to go through the Floral Noel set, and I am going to take you through using a stencil in ways that I bet you have not tried yet. They're using it the way that we're going to do. We're going to use some heat embossing, and I've got tons of tips and tricks on how to do this so that it is very easy and really helps you complete your stencils even faster. So this one has a die cut, the Noel does, that we're going to use. So it makes it very easy to cut out my letters, and we'll do that on one card. The other card, we'll use them and just use the stencil. Now, on one of these cards, I make a mistake and fix it in this video. I'm going to show you a couple of ways to fix things as well. So we've got tons and tons of things to go over. So let's get started with our first set. We're going to use white Bristol smooth cardstock because we're going to do some ink blending and some heat embossing with this. Now, anytime you're going to do heat embossing, you have got to add some anti-static powder. So that is the first tip. Make sure you add the anti-static powder and do it generously because we are going to be putting embossing over this stencil. Now, these stencils are kind of clear. I hope you can see the Noel on there. We're starting with the first layer, which is just the letters. For this card, I really want to use embossing on the letters. I really want some gold letters. I'm planning to cut these out and put them on navy, and gold just looks so good. So I have this sponge thing that is called like a sponge dauber. You could use a paper pouncer, but I highly recommend using something spongy to get ink on the paper. Using a brush, embossing ink can kind of be hard on your brushes, so you need a dedicated brush. Two, it just doesn't get as much ink down, I feel like, as actually pouncing the ink on there. The other thing about this sponge dauber is that it's a pretty good size. It almost completely covers an letter, which is amazing. This paper pouncer or whatever, sponge dauber, whatever we want to call it, will be linked in the description, and I will also link in my supply list other things that I have used successfully like this, so you'll have some options. Now, just slowly get your stencil off. I'm pulling it off a sticky mat, so sometimes that takes just a second. And try not to touch your panel if at all possible. You can bend a sticky mat, try to keep your hands behind it because it has powder on it that's keeping static from happening. So you want to do your best to keep from touching that. We're going to use gold rich powder, and I'm going to carefully sprinkle this over there. I love how when you sprinkle embossing powder, it looks like nothing is there until you tap it off, and then it's just gorgeous. So I'm going to do this all over carefully, making sure I don't touch my design and making sure I touch as little of the paper as possible. And then we will heat it up, and I'm going to show you how gorgeous it turns. And the nice thing about embossing powder is that once you've heated it up, you don't have to worry about smearing it or anything else with future parts of this card. The other thing I love is that if you're using a paste or something like that, you're going to have to let it dry, and it's a little raised up, which makes it hard to stencil over. So I feel like this is the perfect in between of those and really gives you some great shine. So I'm going to speed through and just show you that I did ink blend over this and how easy it was. And then we will move to our next card. And with our next card, instead of ink blending, we are going to use completely heat emboss. So it's layers of heat embossing, and I'm going to show you ways to do that easily. So if you want to skip ahead to all those tips, feel free to jump ahead. And I'm going to show you just quickly this ink blending because part of the ink blending that makes this card stand out so well, the gold really makes it stand out. Let's go with the heat embossing is the star of the show. But this ink blending where you're creating dark and light really makes it just pop off the page like it's on a spotlight. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a base color of ink, and I will of course list all of those inks for you. And then I'm going in with almost, it's a waffle flower brush. It's almost like a little paintbrush, and I'm just adding a darker version of the color to the edges to create some depth. So once all the berries are finished, I'm going to come in with Cranberry Fizz, which is a darker color of this red, and I'm going to use this little brush. So see how it has like a little flat edge? And I'm just brushing up from the edge, and it gives the centers of these a much darker look. It also kind of makes the strokes from the brush in the ink, and to me, that gives it even more details. Like sometimes you can see just like a little bit of lines of how you brushed it, and I think that makes it stand out even more. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on these berries so that you can see them. Do you see that difference by adding that extra color? I think it looks so good. So all that's left to do are the flowers, and I'm just barely going to put some color on them just so that they're not perfectly white. And I'm using buttercream, and you'll see this just makes a difference because if you left those flowers white, then when I cut this out, it's just gonna kinda look like I left a hole right there. It just won't look quite as beautiful, and that buttercream looks great with navy. Let me show you once they're cut out, look at how awesome this is gonna look on navy. The piece of paper that I have right here, I tried to see if they would fit across it, is, not quite A2. It's a 4 by 5.25, so I ended up turning it kind of like the die suggests and putting it this way on this piece. And I created a little banner at the bottom too, which I used white heat embossing on and then did some ink blending. This is how the card turned out. I just love it. It's so bold. Now we're going to look at completely heat embossing. And not only are we completely heat embossing, we're using navy paper. So I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on embossing on colored paper and what to do to emboss this entire image in different colors, as well as some mistakes I made and how to fix them. Now, don't worry about the anti-static powder. I put a ton on it, and then I'm having to just pat in small areas to get this stuck to the sticky mat because you don't want to rub that powder off. Now I just need to line up my stencil. All right, now once I have it, to me on this navy paper, it's actually easier. I think I use a lot less ink because I can see that I'm definitely getting the paper wet as it turns that navy blue, and you can kind of see spots that you missed. So on a darker piece of paper, it might even be easier to do this. Because we've used that anti-static powder on the front of this, we just tap off, and if you've got any areas that are concerning that it's sticking to that shouldn't, just either use your finger or a little paintbrush. Most of the time, just tapping the back gets everything that's not supposed to be there off for me. Now all you need to do is go ahead and heat emboss. So every time we put down some embossing powder, we are going to have to heat the paper. So be gentle with your heating. Go backwards, forwards, do it on maybe a lighter speed, and stop as soon as it's melted. Okay, so I got it all melted. It looks really nice, and it still has some of the powder on there, which is fine because we're going to need to keep adding anti-static powder as we stick this on the mat. We're having to run our hands over it, and so you're getting oils and things on there that will trap other embossing powder. So anytime that you do one section, go ahead and get it stuck down to the mat. Part of the reason I'm being a little bit more forceful with it is because sometimes your paper warps a little bit, and a nice thing about the sticky mat is it helps keep it straight. So I'm trying to keep it as unwarped as possible. I will also show you a way at the end to fix that if you did a little bit aggressively overheat. And then I'm going to add some more powder, and we'll do our next layer. And you don't ever have to change your sponge dauber because you're only using one ink with it. You're using a clear ink. So I know that you see me using the same one, but I actually even labeled this one as embossing ink so that that's all I use it for. And it works great. Each of these other parts are kind of small, so it's pretty quick to fill this in. And then let me show you what embossing powder we're going to use. I wanted to keep it to very little color, but I wanted it to be super elegant. So I picked polished silver for the leaves, and it looks beautiful. I'll show you how it looks after I've heated it up. Okay, so look at how beautiful this silver looks. It's nice. It's going to look even brighter when I brush all this powder off of it, but it looks beautiful. Now, here's where mistakes are made. We're going to do the berries. So these are the little berries that you see on the stencil, and I'm going to do them in red, but let me show you my mistake. Now, this is a case for always testing your embossing powders on dark colors. So see how I've got that swatched on the top and it's red, but I only swatched it on white. So I just assumed that when I put it on this navy paper that it was going to show up bright red. I was super excited about it, but I didn't realize it was one of my older swatches. I now swatch on black and white paper just to get an idea whether it's a translucent powder or it's an opaque powder. It's sometimes hard to tell, and having that swatching would have saved this whole process. So watch what I mean. When I start heating it up, I realize this is actually going to heat to more of a dark, clear looking. It has a hint of red to it, but it's not what I expected. You can see me looking at it like, what happened? And then I realized, well, I need to go ahead and heat it all, and then we'll decide what we're going to do here. I really want some red on this because I have big plans for adding red to this color. So now I've got just these dark blobs. So I need to finish the flowers and then I can fix this area. So my flowers are actually a white puff embossing powder, which means that it kind of raises up and creates texture on your card, which I thought would be really cool for these flowers. If you are doing this raised texture, it's a little bit different heating than you would with the other embossing powder in that it doesn't turn shiny. It kind of puffs up like puff paint. So just know that we're not waiting on shiny. We're working on raised texture. And here's what I mean. Let me show you. You see how that heats up? It does turn brighter white, which helps you out, but it almost bubbles up. And with this stencil, I'm going to have to go back and do the rest of the flowers because one stencil has some flowers and then another stencil has more flowers. So I'm going to have to do this a couple times. And then I'm also going to show you that if you want even more texture, here's how you add more. So I wanted a little bit more texture, and I had a couple of areas that I felt like didn't get enough embossing. So I'm using this mixed media brush. This is just Wow Embossing Powder ink, and just like in my ink pad, but it's on a brush, so you can kind of touch it in and add it to wherever you want. And then we'll pour the embossing powder over that, and it will cover any little white areas that we have or any areas that have the ink and make them raise up just a little bit more. So you see, I'm just kind of filling in any gaps, adding a little to the center of each one, and this works perfectly. Okay, let's talk about fixing these red berries. I want them to be red, and there are two ways to fix these. I went with what seemed like a simpler, as far as time goes, way to do this, which is grab some gem stickers and just get various sizes of these beautiful red stickers and put them over it. Now, if you wanted to make these red so that you had a completely embossed panel, all that you would need to do is to go back to that stencil, place it over, add some more ink. You would start with white. So you would heat emboss in a smooth white. I would use the Wow Opaque Bright White. And once that is heated, you would do it one more time with the same red, and that is going to give you the true red color. So you have lots of options. I chose to use these gems just because I was already excited about the extra texture that the puffy embossing powder had with the white, that I thought I'm just going to take that to even another level and add tons of jewels on this, because for me, this whole card is about just showing off sparkle, and so I thought these would be beautiful. So let me show you how it turns out. Once I've got these on, I am going to use a microfiber cloth to wipe the whole panel off. And I know people always worry that powder is going to stick on there. It's not going to be a true navy, but I'll show you at the end what I did. Then I'm going to cut this panel down, and I'm actually going to create some gold accents around the edge. And you'll see, because I'm going to round the corners and make it a very interesting looking card. So let's hop right to that. Now I've rounded my corners, and I'm going to take embossing ink and I'm going to go along the edges of this, and we're going to add a gold line that matches perfectly with the letters. Okay, now I'm just going to pour this gold rich embossing powder along the edges. You could pour it over the whole panel, but you don't really need to do that. You just need to touch the edges in it to get some of that powder, and then we'll heat it up and we'll have this beautiful gold line around our panel. And I usually do two sides, and then I'm going to go back and do the other two sides just so that it's easier to hold on to, but look at how gorgeous that looks. Okay, and let me show you what I mean. See how it's got rounded corners on this flat sheet? Now, if you have any warping in your paper, using some foam tape like this really helps flatten your panel out. So I put foam tape all over the back in kind of a messy configuration, but it really keeps my panel very flat because I did do a lot of heat embossing on this. So it never hurts to add that foam just for stability. It just kind of makes it a more I don't know, it just makes it more firm and gives it a little bit more weight. You will see that even though it's double-sided adhesive, I usually add glue to let me have a little bit of movement in my placement. I want this to be placed just right so it looks good with the rest of the card, so I tend to add a little bit of glue and then do the placement. And I decided to add a little gold cording with that smaller sentiment at the bottom there, and I just love how this turned out. Tell me in the comments, are you gonna try completely embossing a card? Have you tried embossing with stencils yet? Let me show you the different cards so you can see. This is the one we just did the gold on the letters. It looks so beautiful. And then it's here compared to the one that we used only embossing for. I will say these are much more impressive up close. I wish you could see them in person. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day. Bye.